Hi guys, it's Sophie. Welcome to my January wrap-up. I was really keen to get back into the habit of doing monthly reading wrap-ups. I think they feel like a really helpful way for me to kind of reflect, but it being that I read less now, it doesn't feel so overwhelming to film. So it felt like the right time to be sort of reintroducing them. So this month, was a very non-fiction heavy reading month. So I will talk a little bit about the two fiction first, and then we'll dive into the non-fiction section. I did an awful lot of reading this month on my Kindle or on Audible. So I'm going to use pictures rather than fetching the books because there's only a couple of physical books that I could show you. So the first fiction that I read was Final Cut by Charles Burns, which is actually a graphic novel. This follows a group of young adults as they are sort of trying to film a homemade kind of Super 8 style movie. They have filmed horror movies since they were a group of young friends, particularly these two men who've been friends since they were very young, and they have kind of had this be part of a part of their friend group for a long time. Then a woman called Laurie comes into the mix, who's introduced to the group by one of the members, and she is an attractive redhead who I think everyone pretty much within the book has a bit of a crush on. She agrees to be the leading role in their next horror movie that they're going to film, and it sort of unfolds from there. The book has sections of I guess sort of direct like film pieces where it's as if it were in the director's mind, and also some pieces where the film is what it looks like in reality, being homemade, which is quite good fun. But really the story is about the relationships between these friends and the addition of this new attractive person into the mix. I did enjoy it. I think the art style was amazing. So yeah, would recommend that one. The second fiction that I finished was a book of short stories, and that is Antarctica by Claire Keegan. These are just artfully written short stories. When I read them, I don't know if anyone else will get this, when I read them, it felt like when you learn to do creative writing, like at uni or on a course or whatever, and they break down like how stories should function. And the one they use quite often is the story of the three wolves and the three little pigs and their houses, and how you progress through this plot line, but the real plot twist is when the wolf comes down the chimney, not when the wolf arrives and starts huffing and puffing. And I knew that we were seeing like a really clear story progression through a lot of these stories, and I kept getting caught completely by surprise as the wolf descended the chimney. It's one of the best short story collections I've read in quite a long time, and I would definitely recommend it. I think that the stories came out a little while ago and this is a reissue. So yeah, it's one that my stepdad actually gave to me, so that was really kind, and I really, really loved them. Then I have a little collection of knitting non-fiction, which I'll put at the end, but the ones that are not knitting related are Engines of Privilege, and that's by Frances Green and David Kynaston. This is a book that looks at the phenomenon of private schooling in the UK and the impact that that has on social mobility. It discusses first of all, the impact that it has currently. It also talks about some of the options for reform, as well as sort of the history, I suppose, of the political landscape in relation to abolition or alteration of the private school sector. I did enjoy this one. I did feel as though I got what I needed from it by kind of halfway through, because I think I had a tangential interest rather than a really deep interest in this topic. But I think it was very well written and well debated, and it's one I'm definitely glad to have read. Then I have Facemaker, and that's by Lindsay Fitzharris. The Facemaker is a book that is looking at the beginnings, I would say, of kind of plastic surgery as a formed field. There had been plastic surgery that's existed for a number of, well, hundreds of years before this sort of time period that we're looking at, but really this professionalised the field, and an awful lot of experimentation had to happen in this time to try to understand what was possible in terms of facial reconstruction. So this is the story of a surgeon who was operating in and around the First World War, and he was essentially trying to learn plastic surgery on the fly because of the numbers of facial injuries that were coming out of essentially the trenches from trench warfare, which had never been managed, never kind of been matched. The number of men, the level of kind of military power, and the vulnerability of sort of things like when they started they had like wool cloth hats rather than any kind of helmets, and then later some of the helmets were found to shear, and it actually sort of made facial injuries worse. So it's talking about one particular surgeon, but later kind of a group of surgeons worldwide who were trying to understand how to rebuild these men's faces. This was absolutely fascinating, 100% a 5-star read, and I would really recommend it to anyone who's interested in either medical non-fiction or fiction in regards to the First World War. I think both groups of interest would really enjoy this one. Then I read Hey Hun by Emily Paul Linson. I actually listened to this one on audio, would definitely recommend it as an audiobook experience. And this looked at the author's experience of being within an MLM, and it was just really interesting and exactly kind of what I'd expected. But she talks about all of the phases of her experience within the company, from entry level being introduced by a friend all the way up to like a very senior figure within the MLM. And then she talks about her kind of, I guess, disinvestment from the MLM and how she eventually moved out of it. If you're into, like I am, anti-MLM content on YouTube, I think you'll enjoy this one. You probably have already read this one. But yes, I, for whatever reason, have a bit of a rabbit hole interest in anti-MLM stuff and anti-MLM on Reddit. So it fitted very nicely. I would also recommend it if someone you know is in an MLM. I think it explains the mechanisms by which people are kept within these systems. And if you're in an MLM and quite happy, cool, might be worth a read to, I guess, understand why other people might have troubles, particularly when they're investing money they don't have into the MLM, rather than using it in a way that feels sustainable for themselves. So I think it was really interesting. I think a lot of people would, you know, like to understand a bit more about that world. Then I read My Good Bright Wolf by Sarah Moss, which is her memoir, talking about, broadly, I would say, her experience with her eating disorder. But really, it is a story about her childhood and the things that she interacted with. I really like memoir. I like Sarah Moss, and I won't say too much sort of else about the content around her life, because I think there's something about sort of taking it as she takes you through her early childhood and then into the rest of her life. I really enjoyed that. The thing I would say that I really enjoyed, that I do think was quite unique, was throughout the memoir there are two narrators. One is herself telling the story to us as the reader of how she interprets her life. The other is a voice of doubt as to whether or not we can believe her recollections and whether or not the things that she's telling us happened in the way that she believes them to have happened, which is absolutely fascinating. So she's interrogating herself with this sort of judgmental voice, and we hear kind of her inner monologue through the way in which she's telling this story. I would say that trigger warnings for eating disorders, certain, and some trigger warnings about suicide as well. But it is a beautifully written memoir, and whilst I do think it could be fairly triggering if you are suffering from any active phase of an eating disorder, I think it's held nicely, if that makes sense. It doesn't feel as if it's overexposed. She's not just showing her belly to us and rolling over. It is more of a peek through into her life, and I was really struck personally by a section where she talks about attending A&E and that experience that she had with clinicians there. So yes, I really enjoyed that one, but I would just be mindful. I don't think that it's one that I would recommend if you, as I say, are currently struggling, just with the way that some of the things are discussed, because they are very real. Then I have 3 books in relation to knitting that I read this month. And the first one was Vanishing Fleece, Adventures in American Wool, and that was by Clara Parks. This is a book that talks about the hand knitting and wool industries in the States and attempts to determine how they function by the author having a bale of wool from a friend and trying to move that all the way through to a finished product that can be knitted with. And she's talking about kind of the history of wool in the United States. She's also talking about the ways in which industries have changed the value of wool, and really how small of an industry it is, which is absolutely fascinating. I think we think a bit more now about natural fibres, don't we, and microplastics and those sort of things, but understanding the ways in which industries for some of these natural fibres function is just really interesting to think about globally why we have such a reliance on plastic products. So whilst it is a quite specific book, if any of the other things that I've mentioned interest you, you might have an interest in that one. Similarly, I read a book based in the UK on a very similar topic, which is called This Golden Fleece, which is a journey through Britain's knitted history. That one is by Esther Rutter. And in this, the author is talking about the ways in which wool have been used in the UK through different techniques that she's attempting to undertake herself. But in doing so, we learn quite a lot about the industry in the UK, and actually it felt quite contrasting, I think, to The Vanishing Fleece, in that there felt as though there were these pockets of flourishing in the UK, where knitting remained a really proud and old tradition, which was interesting just to kind of compare the two. Though similarly, plastics dominate in terms of the fashion market in the UK. So yes, those two paired nicely for me, but they are quite a deep dive if you're not into the knitting content. And then the last one that I read that was knitting related was The Yarn Whisperer by Clara Parks. I ended up just reading a few of hers. I read a few last year. We're gonna have to carry on here, apologies. Tom is poorly and he's in the bedroom at the minute, and my camera battery's just died, so I can't replace it. So we're just doing it on a phone just for the last 2 minutes. So yes, The Yarn Whisperer by Clara Parks is a collection of sort of short, very short little essays, I suppose, about knitting. She relates to a number of different techniques and other aspects of her life and how knitting weaves in. It's definitely one I'm only going to say you'd enjoy if you're really into knitting at the minute, so it doesn't have that wider appeal that the other two have, but I enjoyed it, and I've read a few of hers recently, and yeah, they're enjoyable if that's something that you're into. So that was everything that I read in January 2025. I'm pretty happy with my quantity and quality of reading. I feel as though I've done quite well, considering, that life's busier now. And it's been nice to have a bit of a mix of a couple of physical books, some e-readers in the evenings, and some audiobooks as well. Let me know in the comments down below what you've read this month that you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys again soon in my next video. Bye!